Thank you guys very much. I gave a presentation recently where I talked about losing a good friend of mine. And afterwards, this young woman came up to me and she said, "Drew, I feel bad for the pain that you've had to go through in your life." And then she told me her story. And she had lost both of her parents and her grandparents by the time she was 18. And I said to her, "How can you tell me that you feel bad about the pain I've had in my life when yours obviously dwarfs mine?" And she smiled and she said, "You know what, Drew, I've discovered that there is no universal measuring unit for pain. Hurt just hurts. And only hurt people hurt other people." And she says, "I think if we want to be the type of people who actually never hurt others, we have to find a way to let go of the things that hurt us the most." And I was really inspired by that. So what I want to do today is I want to share with you guys the story of the thing that has hurt me the most in my life. Because I think it's something that not enough people understand. And if we're going to change that, I think more people need to talk about it. And I have a mental illness called bipolar disorder. And I think really in the name itself, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of this. Because what I have is a disease. And they call it an illness. And to me, somehow an illness sounds like it's some sort of inconvenience. And what I have is a disease, because diseases wreck lives and diseases can take lives. And this disease, what it's done is it's made me spend my entire life swinging back and forth unexpectedly between two different states: clinical depression and mania. And most of my mid-20s onward, I've been living with depression. Now, I know that some people think depression is a sadness. And I want to tell you something. Depression is something much more profound than sadness. Depression is an emptiness. Depression is a numbness. It's a hole that you feel is inside of you. Into it, you can throw everything you love and everything you're passionate about and everyone you care about in this desperate attempt to make you feel like there's life again in you. And that hole never seems filled, and it never seems to close off. And well, that's been the reality of my life from 25 onwards. When you go back earlier in my life, the disease has given me a significantly different experience. Because bipolar has been called manic depression. And I used to think that manic depression just meant that you were incredibly depressed. And I now realize that mania is a completely different state than depression is. As a matter of fact, it is the polar opposite of depression. Mania is this euphoria in your brain. It is your brain on fire with passion, with energy, with ideas. And I know that that sounds like something that would be incredibly desirable. But the fact is, your brain can move so fast that it can lose all concept of what is socially acceptable. And your brain's moving so fast that you go on binges of booze and drugs and food and sex, and you spend money like it will never end because your brain actually has no concept that there's going to be consequences. And if it does, it just figures, you know what? It'll all be fine. And you can imagine how living life like that, it doesn't take very long before it starts destroying friendships, and it starts destroying families, and it starts destroying careers. And this is the reality of this manic state. It's incredibly destructive to a life. But here's the thing, here's what's so odd about this disease. There's a place your brain can go, short of the true mania, before you lose control of who you are and awareness of the way the world expects you to act. It's called hypomania, and it's right before there. And that's like the disease has given you a step up on everybody around you. See, odd thing about it, it's like you have a gear that nobody else has. You can feel more insightful, you can feel more powerful, you can feel smarter and more charismatic. And as a result, you end up sometimes moving faster ahead of everyone else and getting the type of things that other people want in life. And when I look back now at my life, I realize that it was this part of the disease that basically drove me through high school with a 99 average. And being valedictorian and president of the student union and editor of the school paper, because only in high school can you control the government and the press at the same time. Nobody can, right? And this is what drove me to the full scholarship to university. And then you have to be #1 in your class at university, an RA, on student union. I had to start a scholarship fund. I started a charity. I became national chair of Canada's biggest charity. I'm breaking fundraising records in my 20s. I'm graduating first class honors with distinction. I'm getting a job, and I am creating one of the biggest leadership programs in the country by the time I'm 30. And this part of the disease, this hypomania, I realize now, is such a big part of what that was. I didn't realize it till much later. And I realized that it's that part of the disease that made my girlfriend start calling me Superman. And then my students start calling me Superman because they're seeing me in my office at all hours of the day and night. And the problem with being called Superman, guys, is that you want to live up to the name. You don't want to let people down who love you. Is there any worse feeling than feeling like you let down people who loved you. And so I wanted to live up to this name of Superman. But what happens is I moved into my 20s and my reality became more the depression than the mania. All of a sudden, everything that drove me to do all of these things that I thought made me matter, it was gone. I couldn't do them anymore. And I knew something was wrong. I didn't know I was bipolar, but I knew something was wrong. But I didn't want to ask for help because, what do you say? Superman is weak? Because I had become convinced that the only reason people cared about me was because of what I could do, not who I was. I thought that they cared about me because of the speeches that I could give and the money that I could raise and the organizations that I could run. And I had set these expectations for myself, and I believed that they had set the same ones, and all of a sudden I couldn't reach them anymore. There was just, the energy wasn't there. This thing that had always driven me was gone. And it was replaced by this darkness. And I didn't ask for help because I honestly thought that I would cease to matter to people. And I know now that that is not how my friends thought of it. They cared not about the guy that I could be, they cared about who I was. But at the time, it didn't make any sense to me. And the depression keeps getting darker and darker, and it eventually takes me here. Now, this is supposed to be the last photograph that was ever taken of me, and I had planned it that way. And it's taken on this extraordinary place called Cape Breton Island in Canada. And my plan was that I was going to go there for one last day with my best friends, my favorite place on earth. I was going to spend the day there, and at the end of the day, I was going to leave the island, and I was going to down a bottle of sleeping pills and take my own life. And suicide. Like, how do you explain to people who've never had the experience what it is like to believe that you should die? And I think that when you don't understand why someone else would do something, what you do is you ask yourself, well, why would I do? And I know for most of you in this audience, when it comes to suicide, the answer is that you simply wouldn't. You can't possibly think of a scenario where that would make sense to you. And that's the terrifying thing about mental illness, about bipolar and clinical depression and schizophrenia, is that they can make our brains forget. Not memories, but they can make our brains forget what the fundamental purpose of our brain is. Because they're remarkable, our brains. They can pull off extraordinary things. You're going to see that today. But at its fundamental core, your brain's job is to protect you. Your brain's job is to keep you alive. That's why when somebody runs out in front of your car, you slam on your brakes without thinking. It's why you actually can't poke yourself in the eye. Please do not try that. Guys, it's because we have this magnificent machine in our head that its only real base purpose is to keep us alive. And I have a disease that makes my brain forget that. Worse, I have a disease that makes my brain think that I am its enemy, and therefore it should destroy me. And here's the problem. Your brain has the capability of doing that. So what is it like when your own brain turns on you? It's fighting an enemy that knows everything about you. It knows more about you than you know about yourself. It is fighting an enemy that knows exactly what your weakest spots are and exactly which attacks will do the most damage and at what time. And the worst thing is it's fighting an enemy that can take away the two things you need most in your life when you're going through a difficult time. It can take away hope and it can take away faith. Because your brain is in charge of generating those things for you, hope and faith. And it can turn them off when it wants to. And to fight an enemy that can do that, like to fight an enemy that is capable of taking that away from you, can be so frustrating, and it can be so terrifying, and it could be so exhausting that you actually begin to think that death is the only way to defend yourself. It's not giving up, it's not copping out, it's not surrendering. What it is it's one last thing that you believe you can do to defend yourself. And I'm here because of friendship and love, which luckily are two things that we all have to give in unlimited amounts. Because I had a friend with a terminal illness once tell me, the worst thing about this disease isn't that I know I'm going to die. I think we all know that we're going to die one day. The worst thing about this disease is the look in the eyes of the people who love me, because every time they look at me, no matter how hard they try to hide it, I see this fear they have of the pain I'm going to cause them one day. And I have no control over that. And it just wrecks me. And I realized that night, at the end of that day, that my friend had no choice in causing that pain. And I did. And I was going to choose to do that to my friends and to my family. And I couldn't take that last step until I knew that I had taken every step before that. And I knew I hadn't done that because I hadn't asked for help. So I went back and I asked for help. And I remember walking into the psychiatrist's office for the first time, and I had never felt weaker, and I had never felt as if I was a bigger failure in my life. I remember actually specifically thinking, Superman's dead. And I walked into this office, and I realize now when I look back, that is the strongest I've ever had to be. And it is probably the most important day in my life, because that's the day bipolar was explained to me. And it was like 15 years of my life all of a sudden clicks together and makes total sense. And the doctor looks at me and goes, we have a way of treating this. There's a mood stabilizer that you can take. And I think it'll take away these swings. But I have to tell you something. A lot of people resist this treatment. A lot of people push back from it, especially creative people, especially artists and musicians, because they say all of a sudden something's gone. Like that next note that had always just appeared, that next lyric that was always there, that next knowledge of where the brushstroke was supposed to go, all of a sudden it's gone. And they say they can't live without it. And Drew, you've told me that you're a speaker, and you told me that you never feel more alive than when you're speaking. And the next sentence, and the next idea, the next word has always just appeared for you. I have to ask you this. Are you prepared for the possibility that that will no longer be the case for you? And now that's a decision you get to make, eh? You get to live, but you have to give up the thing that you live for. But I was going to die. And I realized at this particular point, I didn't want to die. What I wanted was for the battle in my brain to finally stop. And I thought that death was the only way that that could happen. And that happens to so many of us. We think that's the only way it can go away. And now this person was telling me that might not actually be the case. And I realized that I owed it to myself and I owed it to my friends to see if that was true. Because guys, our lives are a tribute to everyone who has ever cared about us, but only if we live them. And so I decided to take these drugs, and as time went on, all of a sudden it was like I was living a totally different life. Because the swings were gone. And I felt for the first time that my brain had a home. And I know it's so weird to say your brain has a home, because you're like, dude, it's up here. I know exactly where it is at all times. But all of you have been happy and all of you have been sad, sometimes in profound ways. But you all have a place where your brain goes back and is home, is safe. I never had that before. I'd like to say that I went back to normal, but I didn't even know what normal was. I never had it. Like my brain, my emotions, my moods were nomads. There was no home. And they could live places other people couldn't. And they could even thrive places other people couldn't. But I never felt at home and at peace. And for the first time in my life, that was happening. And I would like to tell you all that that's where the story ends. And I would like to tell you all that that peace lasted. But the infuriating thing I know for those of you who love people with mental illness is, why don't we stay doing those things that keep us healthy? And there's this recurring plot line, I think, in most superhero stories. It almost always appears where the superhero loses their powers, and then they're completely obsessed with getting them back, because without them they don't feel like they're whole. And I think I get that to some degree, because there's this place where your brain can go when you're hypomanic, that's beyond normal, but before you lose track of who you truly are, where you can feel extraordinary, where you can feel like you're funnier and more charismatic and more articulate and just more than ever any other point in your life. Like you feel like you're the absolute best person you can be when your brain is in that spot. And to say goodbye to the darkness forever, to say goodbye to the depression, to never go back to that place where you never want to, you also have to say goodbye to this extraordinary place. You also have to say goodbye to that person that you think is the most extraordinary you. And for a while you were cool with that, because you know you are a better person. You know your life is better, and you know you are a better friend, and you know you are a better son or daughter, and you know you are a better everything. But eventually you start to convince yourself, I need that extraordinary person back, just for a little while. Like just until this tough time at work goes by, or just until this tough time at home goes by, or just until that extraordinary person who would never, ever pay attention to me when I'm normal realizes how extraordinary I am. And so you pick a fight, and you say, I'm going to stop doing it. I'm going to stop taking the drugs, just for a little while. But now that I know what to look for, when I feel the darkness coming, I'll go back. And the problem is this. The thing that warns you the darkness is coming is the thing that brings the darkness. And you always lose that fight. And I have lost that fight on more than one occasion. But I have to let that go. And I have to start to fight again. We all do. Because what I've realized is the most extraordinary person I am is the one who keeps fighting and winning that fight. And I think that it's difficult to tell this story because I'm not responsible for what this disease does to me. I'm not in charge of the fact that I have it. But what I am responsible for and what I am in charge of is making sure I do everything within my power to stay healthy. And the thing is, all of you are responsible for the same thing. You may not have mental illness, but I bet you every single person in this room is fighting something silently and alone because you think that asking for help will make you look weak. But we all have a responsibility to do everything we can, to use all the resources available to us to make sure we can live the life that we want and we can live the life that we deserve. We all have that responsibility. And I have another one, I think, and that is to not fight this quietly anymore because I've done it for too long. And I've seen friends of mine and other people fight these diseases, and I sit down with them and I tell them part of my story, and I hear from them the same fear that I have, which is no one will trust you. You will be unemployable, and you will be an embarrassment to the people who love you. They're afraid of that, just like I am. And I have people who I love and people I trust and people who I know have my best intentions at heart, and they say, Drew, you can choose to talk about leadership or you can choose to talk about having mental illness, but you don't get to talk about both. You'll have no credibility. I had my old university tell me that we can't have the leader of our leadership program tell people he's mentally ill. That's just the reality we have to deal with. And I said, what if that's the reality I want to change? What if that's the reality I think we have to change? And I was told this: it's not our job to change reality. It is our job to do the best we can with the reality that we're given. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our job to change reality. That is what leadership fundamentally is. And there is no reality we are more in charge of, that we have more control over than our own. So I want to tell you this to all of you out there who are fighting something alone, because you are afraid that asking for help will make you seem weak, will make you seem untrustworthy, will make you an embarrassment to the people who love you, will make you unemployable. I want to tell you this: none of that is true. I want to tell you that asking for help is not weakness, it is strength. I want to tell you that accepting help is not weakness, it is strength. I want to tell you that pushing away the things in our life that we wish we could keep, but we know will eventually hurt us, is not weakness, it is strength. And you are strong, and you're not alone. So let's make that our reality. All right, guys, thank you so very much. Have a great rest of your day.